Okay, I think we're good.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Timothy Ong. This is Derek Chang, and that is AJ Osnich, Andrew Osnich. And we have a master plan proposed for Kenya. The title of our master plan is Puma, which is highly disputed, but I'm sure we're going to change that soon because we think it's a lame name.
It's Turbo King now, right?
Yeah, it's Turbo King. Yes. It's the bear in Rwanda. So just a little bit about our location, where our project is. Of course, it's in Africa, Rwanda, Kigali, and a suburb of Kigali would be Kinyinya. It's a nice small place. And within Kinyinya, that's our where our plant is located. And as you can see, like those are the distances from neighboring cities. Not too far away, about a few miles. So, just a bit of context before I get into the concept of our project. Firstly, I think what we know Rwanda for, most people know Rwanda for, is history. The genocide that happened in Rwanda is the 5th most notorious genocide in the world. And it happened really recent, like 20 years ago, not too long ago. And there has been a lot of inter-race rivalry between the Tutsis and the Hutus, and that has been a big part of Rwanda's history. Yeah, and Paul Kagame, the new president, is attempting to, as some of them have said, to modernize Rwanda in the direction of Singapore. But we sort of question that, is it really a road to recovery? Are people still like very hostile with each other? Is there freedom of speech? And it's like other groups addressed, like there might not be. That's kind of hard. The economy of Rwanda, as we found out, is mainly farming. Before the Belgian troops came and invaded Rwanda, the Tutsis and the Hutus, which are the two main races in Rwanda, often farmed together, and I think that's a big part of Rwanda culture before colonization. And it is even so today. Most of the people work on agriculture. 4/5 of the people right now contribute to the agricultural economy. 90% of Rwanda's economy comes from agriculture, so it's a big part of Rwanda. And now the site that we're building on as well is primarily farmland, so we are going to be invading Rwanda's economy and how we're going to deal with that. Energy in Rwanda. People in Rwanda have low energy consumption per capita. It's like we went onto the World Bank data and it's among the lowest in the world, only 23 kilowatt hours per capita. And grid energy is so expensive in Rwanda because most of the energy is imported from nearby neighboring countries, and that makes energy really expensive. What can we do about that? That's another thing to address later. Transit systems in Rwanda, which is part of my research proposal. By the way, I studied a lot. I researched a lot about transit and mass transportation systems. Derek did a lot of research on farming and urban farming, and AJ did a lot of study on the church and how it can, and its application in Rwanda. So just a bit of background on that. So the transit in Rwanda is now primarily buses. There are no plans to integrate probably like more advanced rail systems like light rail systems. The only new development that is coming about is Tanzania, Burundi, and Kigali line, which is inter-country connection. So there's like, so mass transportation in Rwanda is not really being developed in terms of like light rails or more advanced modes of transportation. Now buses are primary of transportation, and it's not, and it's very small buses. It's not like the big buses that we have. Congestion is a problem, and yeah, there's a huge emphasis on cars. Like Paul Kagame, I think, wants cars to be developed further in transit in Kigali. And is that a problem? Is that not? We will explore that more later. The religious situation, most of Rwanda is Christian, 90%, and I think this is very important to note because religion is also very essential to human identity, and forgiveness is emphasized in Rwanda the Rwandan churches a lot, especially post-genocide. Forgiveness is a key theme, which I will touch on a lot later on. And the church is very central to community. People go to churches on Sunday. And it is a major place where people meet up. It is very important to the culture. And just touching a little bit on this subject, the climate in Rwanda and why it's awesome, it's because to implement like PV systems, we always look at sun hours, and there are 5 sun hours in Kigali, which is high, considered high. Northern winds prevail, and they're not very strong winds either. They are very slow winds. And it's perfectly, the temperature is like perfect year round, 21 degrees Celsius. It's very nice. So, just a bit on our site. Because our site is a downhill site, so we just analyze the movement of people. The blue lines are, because people normally move downhill, so the blue lines are the general movement of people, where people tend to want to move downhill. That's the blue lines. But what we want people to, how we want people to move is actually crisscrossing like that, so that they can move along the site slowly while enjoying the views. And this is the response that we had to that diagram, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So the solution, based on the given context, is first, our concept. And our concept is forgiveness. And I'll let spend a bit more time here, even though this might not be entire, we don't really talk a lot about, I guess, concepts like this, but more like architectural design. But I guess I'd like to stay here for a bit. So first, we believe that forgiveness is an ongoing process. It's not something that happens, like I forgive you and that's it, forgiveness happened. We believe that forgiveness is a process and it takes place over a long period of time. And it needs to be addressed in Rwanda today. And another thing is that forgiveness happens 2 ways. It doesn't happen, for example, it's not only the victim that needs to accept forgiveness. I mean, the victim that needs to accept forgiveness, learn to give forgiveness, sorry. If a person is hurt, it's not only the person who needs to it's all right, you hurt me, but it's cool. But it's also the perpetrator, the person who inflicts the crime, that needs to learn how to receive forgiveness. The biggest issue in America today is self-esteem. Many people just don't understand how to forgive themselves, and that's a big problem. So we believe that it's not only the receiving of forgiveness, but it's also learning to give forgiveness that needs to be emphasized in a specific culture. And so based on those things, we believe that, before that, and we believe that it has to happen in 2 steps. First, the realization of forgiveness, and the actualization of forgiveness. So we believe that forgiveness is realized best in the Christian worldview, and being so, firstly, also because 90% of Rwandans are already Christian, therefore it is easy to talk to them about forgiveness in that sense from a Christian worldview. We believe that the church holds the framework for forgiveness that transcends many other worldviews, and some would say all worldviews, and it offers forgiveness freely from God Himself. So this is what we base our forgiveness on. This is the framework for our forgiveness, because once we are forgiven, then we can learn to forgive others or receive forgiveness from God Himself. So this is very important to our concept. And second, backwards. The actualization of forgiveness through architecture. We want every part of our architecture to say, you know what, you're forgiven. Come rejoin society. Come be reintegrated into the social fabric, the urban fabric. And that is what we want our architecture to do, to emphasize, to actualize forgiveness. Because forgiveness is a process. It's not you're forgiven and that's it. Forgiveness, post-forgiveness means you are reintegrated into society and you can live harmoniously with people. And that's what we want our architecture to do. So, our forgiveness happens by post-forgiveness, sorry. Let me just read this. Restoration of values and dignity is proof of forgiveness, I believe. And that's what we want to achieve. By reintegrating people into society, that's what we rebuild, dignities and values. And therefore, our architecture and our programmatic elements aim to do that. So before, just to give you a heads up on our actualization process, we are interested in developing an assisted farming program whereby the master plan allows people to farm together, harmonious together. I'll just leave it at that, and then we will explain further as we go on to the boards, because we have a lot to explain, I guess. This is a brief preview of our master plan, where, as you can see, how we want people to move downhill, as well as towards this central focal point, which is the church. And just a few views of our site. The aerial view. This is another view. This is just the master plan. It hasn't been the housing hasn't been included in the master plan yet. And also the experience of the site, how we want the site to feel. It's just a rough sketch. And then this is more of a housing typology, which we will look into further, and another street view, which we will get into. Okay. So I'll hand it over to AJ to explain more of his, to start explaining about his part of the project, about housing development, how forgiveness is implemented.
Do you guys need to pause a little bit for the camera to be?
Yeah.
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 We're going to start.
Yep, we're ready.
So, as Tim mentioned, we focused a lot on how the church is going to be this focal point on the master plan, so everything kind of lends itself down to the church. So, in regards to housing typologies, we looked at 3 different kinds, and one of them, and kind of one of the keys to this theme of forgiveness, that we thought would tie together is providing housing specifically for refugees and lending this theme of forgiveness to the refugees, showing them forgiveness first, like Tim said, so that they'll be able to forgive others. And so one of the ways that we wanted to do that was by using the church and how the church can kind of teach this theme of forgiveness to connect to the refugee housing. So I'm going to you guys to look at the model for that. So we have the church here, which is the bottom of this is just the bottom section of the site. And the housing itself is actually connected directly to the church. And so to develop that housing and how that's going to look and get into the details, I had to first look at what the design of the church is going to be, just kind of in general, and how that's going to shape the housing. So originally, we used this kind of flow that we had on the master plan in itself to create these curved pieces that led to the curve of the entire master plan and extend down. They were pretty simple in general, just kind of getting the massing down. But then after looking at the population that we'll have in our site, we might have close to 300 units, which could be up to like 1,500 people in this site. And so considering that, the amount of people that we would want out of those 1,500 to be in this sanctuary at one given time is a lot. We would have several hundred people. So this shape eventually expanded itself and took up a lot more room than it originally did, taking away some of the outdoor space, but emphasizing this idea that we want to create a community where they're all going to be in this one space together as a community, growing together. So the sanctuary itself grew, and then this idea has developed throughout the master plan of bridging. So I'm going to touch on that briefly and then come back to this. But so we have these bridging elements all throughout. And again, you can see it on model 2 that go over top of the roads. So there's kind of these 3 different tiers that we've developed. So this first tier of bridging over that road right there, it's connecting the housing units, but the bridging itself is going to be sort of community spaces that actually bridge and tie together the community. And so it might be something a little bit more relaxed and peaceful, like a library, different spaces like that. Whereas these other spaces that are overlooking this water element, this pond that we have at the bottom, and overlooking onto the church, are going to be a little bit more interactive. They have a nice view, and so there's not maybe as much of a need to bring this serenity and this peace, whereas this one's right over the road. And I wanted to, maybe you can briefly explain how.
So what we were thinking about is, okay, so what does this bridge mean? And it turns out that these bridges actually serve as a community fabric that connects the entire community together. And that's what we thought of the tiers. Because each tier represents sort of different thing, and then has AJ kind of explained that the first tier is kind of this knowledge and serenity place where people can sit down and understand maybe different bridges probably can represent different culture of Rwanda, and then the bridge sort of on the bottom could represent something that's you can look to the church and kind of just feel this activity going on in you. And another thing I'd like to turn your attention to, and I know it's the picture might be a little bit smaller, is the sort of the design of the bridge. So what we wanted to do with these bridges, as you can see, because these are roads, we want the bridges sort of to be this kind of a probably kind of environmental healthy place where we can place these vegetation that sucks out carbon dioxide from the cars and traffic that's moving back and forth. So that's one of the ways that we're actually separating this community activity between the traffic activity at the bottom. And what that will do is that when you walk on a bridge, you will not really feel that the traffic's moving below you, because there's just these vegetation that surrounds you that you feel like, oh, I'm in a different place, rather than on the bottom. So, and then these tiers, as mentioned before, it's really trying to help the community to be driven together. And the last tier, which is more of the refugee sort of place, sort of trying to put that idea, just kind of made it stronger. So I think you could explain.
Yeah. So the last tier, like you said, basically is just this final connecting point. We're bringing the normal housing, so refugee housing, to the church, and emphasizing bringing them back into community through the church and through these connection points, and not just being this like separate entity. And so because of that, I mean, it shaped the architecture of the building. We decided to kind of carve into this structure and this space through the street that is linking this bridging together. Then from there, began to develop the program of the structure. So we have these health clinics, which will be developed more kind of in the next project. But yeah, just this healing, this idea of healing and forgiveness through, again, using health clinics and refugee housing to connect to the church. We have the sanctuary here. And then because the street is like right here, we have the main entry point and this lobby and entry below. And then just some extra usable housing space, some offices. But so this is the actual refugee housing. And then what additionally developed because of that were these community spaces. Instead of just having just housing the whole way across, kind of the transition between the housing and the church, are these community spaces that developed to draw these people together, specifically that are living there. And so the 3 community spaces we have on the first floor, so we have like youth rooms, because I think half the population, is it, that are under 18 years old. currently in Rwanda. And
That was under 10. You might,
Oh,
you might
under
be
10.
18. Yeah.
so there's a lot of youth, basically, and there's a huge need for, just taking care of them and letting them be focused, and so, just creating these spaces for them to just enjoy. And this is just an extension of maybe a balcony in the sanctuary. But yeah, so the community space is for mostly children and things like that. And like I said, spare housing or offices, health, clinic. But then on the second floor of the housing, we have, okay, so the second floor, there would be kind of just like a dining area and a dining hall, I guess, your kitchen. I think this is useful because you could have, so I kind of mentioned that there's like this spare housing that could potentially be used by, I don't know, youth groups or like overseas missionaries or missionaries that are coming there to like help out this church. And so them, as well as other just community members that are in this community, could be serving the refugees and cooking meals for them and serving them like through this dining space, and thereby again like showing them through serving them this idea of forgiveness and wanting to interact with them and connect with them. And then the third level, there's just an outdoor like garden space for them to enjoy and relax in. And the third level, housing-wise, I'll get to that in a second, is mostly larger families, so they're able to like find a more relaxed space to retreat to if they need. But in addition to the second floor having this dining area, there's also on the roof of the health center, and you can see it on the model, there's would be farming. So farming is one of our key concepts that Derek was going to touch on, I guess. But basically, farming is because it's one of our key concepts in the overall master plan, connecting people. That would be a great idea to have additional farming for the refugees specifically to be able to either learn how to farm or just produce food for themselves and to be able to connect in that way. Because additionally, as we were doing our research, we found that before the genocide and all these tensions happened, before colonization, and the Hutus and Tutsis really, before the hatred even began, there was harmony at one point. And when they first both moved into Rwanda and started living there together, hundreds of years ago, there was harmony, and it was found often in farming because they were farming together and working together. And so we want to bring back this unity through farming and through connecting them again in their work. And yeah, so then I'm just going to touch briefly then on, so that developed the outdoor spaces and yeah, just the program, or the housing itself. So just the first floor was simple. There's 6 units that are slightly smaller. And then on the second floor, there are 5 units, a little bit bigger. And the third floor are 4 units that are even bigger than that. And they're all pretty simple designs with a bedroom and a kitchen and a bathroom. So they all have their own amenities. And the third floor just has this like outdoor porching area for them to be able to relax on for the bigger families that are also like shared by their neighbors. And the last thing I'll mention about this is that, this is a lot, I know, but the facade itself also lends to this bridging concept, and that, so we really wanted to use like wood for this, for the bridging that they mentioned, kind of cleansing all this from what the pollution is going to be happening underneath in the street. So this transition of like using this wooden facade on the health center and kind of slowly going from the wood to what's behind that, which is like this this brick material that they use in Rwanda, CSEB, is that right?
CSEB is compressed stabilized earth block.
Okay, there you go. And so then using that and revealing that more and more until you get to the actual sanctuary, and using basalt, which is another local material that they use a lot, and kind of contrasting it and revealing the importance of this structure specifically. Yeah, and so just letting that bridge again being this connecting element that like flows from one space to the other without this like harsh reality change. Yeah.
So as you can see here, we actually you can actually see 3 different types of farming already on this master plan. One is just the traditional land farming, which Mr. Rosanich has it here, and then we have vertical farming, but Timo will explain later. And then we have step farming, which is, well, I will get to next. So the concept of this step farming that we came up with is that we want to try to encourage people to farm. And how we did it is that we try to make this idea of farming kind of very visible in a lot of aspects. So that's why the step farming, as you can see over there, it's when you walk down the street, you can actually see people taking care of their plants, and that actually serves as a kind of a community driver, because when you're trying to plant these gardens or vegetation, other people can pay attention to you and say, oh, okay, so maybe I want to work as hard as them, because that will make the community much more beautiful, and that's sort of the driver that we want to pull into this type of housing typology. The design of this type of typology is also really trying to get this air atmosphere penetrated into the living space, and this is sort of the first rough sketch that we came up with. We thought that, all right, so if we want to make the scent of the vegetation come into a room, how are we able to do it? So we try to incorporate the roof to be sort of the step farming, so that the roof will have module. We'll have kind of this vegetation module, and in between this module will be this void that the wind can go through, so that whenever they're farming, they can smell what they are growing, and in turn that will be a really good healthy driver for people, because as we know, if you grow something right, the scent that comes into you would actually help your body. And every day when you work, and when you just work around the kitchen or living room or enjoying, there will always be this kind of enjoyment, because you're working, but you're working for your health. So, and another thing is, when we were studying this, we actually went a lot into, okay, so what is actually in the industrial markets? When you buy stuff on your grocery stores, and a lot of stuff we found out, such as with research on Monsanto, which is a GMO company, the stuff that they put in our regular milk, and even just even the vegetable that's on the market is just terribly disgusting, and we don't want to eat them anymore. So, how do we save ourselves from those kind of things? Well, it's farming by ourselves, and controlling what we eat. In doing so, we encourage other people to farm and to live healthily, so that we don't live less, or yeah. And the other thing we're trying to do in here is actually also, as you can see, we try not to have so much rooms. We try to have the space feels very, very open, so that any direction where the vegetation will, except sort of the cover basement area, you will have the air will be able to penetrate through, and the light will also be able to penetrate through these voids in between the module. And one of the things we thought about is also the kind of the air, how the air is going to move around the building. So we thought about, okay, so because there is less of a chance where we could actually put too much fins on there, because we want this to be a metal deck and sort of this solar chimney, where the air come in would follow this metal deck, which when the sun heats up this metal deck, it would allow air to go to hotter places, which again allows kind of this air ventilation through. So what we did over here and over here is that over here we provided the air to go through from the voids between the modules, and here we have fins to provide the wind to go through, because we can't really have all the way through, because there's a kind of a bedroom here. So yeah. So I think I already explained almost everything, but yeah. So overall it's health, promote of health, promotion of environment, and again, as Adrian said before, promoting the original culture that Kigali and the people over there had been doing for centuries to unite themselves for ever, until the Belgians came in and kind of messed everything up. But anyways.
Right. Yep. So this is the model. So this is the last part. Just to sum farming up, I think we're going to close that topic. Farming is historically relevant. Working dignifies people. Interaction between locals can be fostered by farming together. It's interaction between locals and refugees, which is in the refugee housing. It creates healthy dependency, not independency, but healthy dependency on each other. And it's a service not only to our small sub area, but also to like Dana's group, because we're going to sell vegetables to them in the future. So that just sums up farming, I guess. Yeah, so for my project, I have a lot of similar themes to that of Jarek. For example, vertical farms. Let's just go through my project. So firstly, I really wanted my building to gain maximum sunlight so that I can so that the plants receive sunlight all year round. And therefore, as you can see from my model, the top of my model is actually twisted in order to orient itself to the east-west axis. And therefore, the sun is always overhead all day long, and that will give optimum sunlight for the plants. And then to maximize that, I actually pushed it. I slanted the walls. You can't really see it in my model, but I slanted the walls in order to give, you can see in my section, in order to give maximum sunlight, as the sun angle affects it a little bit. Yeah, and I think, and the last part is that there are 2 levels of farming, and just looking back at how Rwanda is famous for its step farms or terrace farms, like I would like to include that as part of my project, having terrace farming. Yeah, and a bit more about energy. Like, I think energy is a big part in Rwanda, and how it will be amazing to produce productive architecture that can produce its own energy. And with the annual consumption of Rwanda, which is only 23 kilowatt hours, and the amount of sun that's available, a photovoltaic system can be implemented, which will be extremely effective and will be able to produce even green energy. That's something that that should be implemented in Rwanda. A little bit more about about the programmatic use. I really want this not to be just exclusive to housing, but also to have shops below, to form this sort of mixed programmatic kind of street, as you can see in the rendering. Like, I want there to be sufficient interaction and convenience between the people who live in Rwanda and the shops below, and the retail below. And I think that would, again, foster a lot of interactions between locals, and also develop this very close-knit society that is actively engaged in economy and the selling and service between each other. So that sums up our presentation. It's a bit long, but I think we covered most of it.
Yeah, 1 to 100, we might want to get a little bit closer to the drawings, but there are a lot of interesting details to be looked at in all the projects, and section especially. I just want to say, before we get started, I think this is a really cool image to look at, but I think it's a little misleading. The perspective's a little off, and the way that you've shown the water there, I think, is a little intense. It looks like a river running through a field with these houses in it, when in actuality the project's very urban, and your houses are on street level. And when you do have water moving through the site, it's going to be a little bit more like this render that you have up there with the Tim's twisted buildings, basically. And why don't you guys talk about that strategy, the water movement strategy in your master plan, and how it's going to pertain to that image especially, but city life?
You want to start the concept? Like, why? Or you want to do it?
Yeah, you're good.
So firstly, by analyzing the topography of a site, water moves downhill. Common knowledge, right? We believe that we can channel this water to prevent, by putting all these rocks that are at different elevations, we can slow down the movement of water downhill so that it doesn't rush down and cause landslides and all those kind of things, which is very important, I guess, for the topography of this site. And this served as a water collection throughout the streets, which is very important for such a topographical area. And also philosophically, the river also represents, the river flowing to the church represents movement going to the center of this community. And since the center of our community is intended to be the church, the river flows to the church and it creates this central focus, which I think makes our site very unique. Sorry, I'm blocking my voice.
But can you explain more the I imagine that's like a traditional housing, the first drawing, or it's
Which one?
Sorry.
what's happening like here?
Oh, this was sort of an experimental
Yeah.
move for the ground to be lifted. Although we felt that didn't exactly work when we were implementing it, so we actually kind of delete this part off and just made it sort of concrete on wood, or just concrete by itself. So.
Talk about the airflow, though. I think that's probably where what she wanted you to speak about.
The ground is relatively. We felt that since the ground is relatively cool.
It's hard to tell where grade is, Derek.
It's sort of right here.
So that lower level is below ground.
Yeah, that lower ground is below ground. So like the below ground can actually be alright, because the soil, we felt that the soil is cool enough so that the ground would not really be, cooling would not really be an issue for the below ground. But we have the airflow going back and forth, and well, to the top on the main floor, so that, yeah.
The reason I was asking, I thought that there could have been water or like airflow going on in that part of it. I looked at several buildings, and a lot of them have underneath they have water, which brings cooling system, and the actual building is ventilated and cooled by the water that is underneath. So since you have quite a lot of water, you could, if you need, I'm not